Hello, and welcome to Driving Systems of High Performance, a podcast all about enabling high-performing teams to become the best version of themselves. I'm Alexis Williams, Head of Strategic Alliances at Atlassian. I'm here with my co-host, Christian Kelly of Accenture, and today we are joined by two special guests from the world of Formula One, Bernie Collins and Otmar Szafnauer, and together we're sitting down with a live audience at the Atlassian office in Austin, Texas. Please join me in welcoming Bernie Collins and Otmar Szafnauer. All right, let's take a seat.
Thanks very much. It was very kind, and it's great to be here, mainly for you and secondarily for all the great snacks you got around the corner.
All right, so in getting started, everybody, we're gonna have these two give some introductions on who they are, a little bit more than we do. But we also want to highly encourage everybody to put your hand up and be ready to ask some questions. Alexis and I have a number of questions that are interesting to us, but we also want this to be interactive. So just put a hand up and we'll get questions from everybody, okay? Bernie, how about you give a longer introduction of who you are and the like?
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thanks for having us here today, as Otmar said. Hopefully it's enjoyable for you all. Hopefully there's some good questions to come. So I'm Bernie Collins. Some of you may know me now because I work with Sky Sports, which I think comes across to you guys as ESPN or various other things. I'm an engineer by trade, so a mechanical engineer. I left my degree or finished my degree and went to McLaren F1 team where I was mainly in the design office, so designing things like gearbox for McLaren. Then I went on to become a performance engineer with McLaren, so basically traveling to the races, helping get the most out of the driver. So I was Jenson Button's performance engineer for the 2014 season, which was my first full season traveling. But I had a real desire to be at the track and part of this team, and I felt like being at the track was making a really big difference to how the car performed. Although obviously lots of people in the factory make a difference as well. And then in 2015, I joined a team that was then known as Force India, which has become Aston Martin under Otmar, interestingly. He was my manager at that time. But I joined Force India as half performance, half strategist. So a strategist looking at how we do the pit stops, how we make decisions through the race, how we get the best out of the car. And as I joined, for various reasons, the strategist left and I became all strategy. And I did from 2015 until the middle of 22 with Force India or Aston Martin as their strategist. So I sat on the pit wall, made decisions about their pit stops and what they do, attended all the events, attended Austin a number of times. And then I left more recently to go to Sky. So that's roughly my background.
And Otmar?
I'm Otmar Szafnauer. I've been racing for, 35 years. I started when I was 10, and I hired Bernie. Now, I've had a passion for racing for a really long time. I'm a graduate electrical engineer, worked for Ford Motor Company for my first 12 years as an engineer and planner and business planner, product planner. I have an MBA as well. And then had the opportunity in 1998 to leave Ford and go work for a Formula One team that was being founded by Jack Villeneuve and his partner, Craig Pollock, Adrian Reynard, and British American Racing. So I was, I think, the 13th hire for British American Racing. I was probably the 73rd person that started. I had 6 months to finish off at Ford. And since 1998 to 2023, I was in Formula One. So prior to that, I raced and had my own team in North America, mainly raced in North America, supporting the IndyCar series and the USAC F2000 series. The team was called Team Otmar Racing, believe it or not. It was very creative. But I'll tell you, the 55 open wheel races that I did behind the wheel, I think I learned as much there than I did in my 27 years of Formula One, or 28 years now. So it's great to be here. That's who I am. And I encourage you to ask any questions that you may have throughout this discussion. I think it'll make it much more interesting, and it'll take us a little bit off topic, and sometimes off topic is even better than on topic. So
I agree with you. Well, welcome to you both. Thank you for being here. So we have three themes that we want to talk about today, and we're going to start with our first one, which is around strategic priorities. So CK, why don't you kick us off?
So on to strategic priorities. So what we see, and Bernie, I'm going to ask this question to you first, is what we see on race day is a car, a driver, and a pit crew. What are all the things that people may not know of that actually go into preparing for and winning a race?
One of the biggest things that goes into preparing is that there's a lot of preparation. A lot of F1 teams do a lot of preparation. And for anyone that watches the F1, I've seen a few nods earlier when I mentioned the coverage, we go out with a plan A. We go out with what lap we're going to stop on, what tyre we're going to fit, how the race is going to go. But we go out with tens of alternative plans, tens of what-if situations. And actually, most of my work on a Saturday night as we got ready for race day was planning for those what-if situations.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talk a lot about in our partnership is really around prioritization. And given like there's just all of the components that go into race strategy and the materials and driver and the cars, like how do you set priorities with the team? Maybe this one is for you, Otmar.
Setting priorities. So generally low-hanging fruit first. Like Bernie says, on race day, you're out with plan A. And you'll often hear the drivers say, we're on plan B now, right? And plan B happens. So plan B sometimes could be a higher percentage than plan A, but usually the probability is you're going to stick with plan A. So the low-hanging fruit is what you plan for, and that's what you set your priorities for. A Formula One race, your priority is winning, but oftentimes you can't win because there's only one winner. So most people can't win. Your second priority is to finish as high as you can, and especially to beat those that are around you that might be marginally faster, but then you out-strategize them. And that's what we would try to do. And for race day, that's what you would do. But the other thing that I want to tell you, it's not all about race day. So race day is what you see. And for a typical Formula One team, just because the numbers are easy, we have about 1,000 employees. A little bit more, but 1,000's easy. Of those 1,000, 100 travel to the race. So it's a 90-10 race day versus total of what you do. And the 90% has much more meaning than the 10%. Because that 90%, and that's where you really got to set your priorities, is where you develop the car, and that's how quick the car is. You only see the drivers, and you see Bernie, and you see the strategy, but you know, I remember Ross Brawn and Schumacher, I think in Monaco, 4 stops, right? Ooh, genius. Well, he could do 4 stops because his lead was so big. And the reason his lead was so big is because that other 90%, that's such a dominant car that when you're in the race, strategy becomes easy. So it's those priorities that we set on car development that is, not to take anything away from Bernie, but that is really what a Formula One team's about. And how do you go set those priorities? You have to understand, again, what aspect of car development will give you the most performance for the resources that you have. And a lot of it is aerodynamics. You know, that's the number one. And oftentimes the mechanical design of the car is compromised for aerodynamics. Another big priority is powertrain. You know, how good of an engine do you have? You know, one of the reasons I'm not at Alpine anymore is we had such a shit powertrain, and they blamed me. We were 25 horsepower down. You can't be 25 horsepower down and expect to win. You have to understand the tires. You don't understand the tires, you can have the best car, the best powertrain, you're nowhere. So you've got to do all those things, and then what you see is the culmination of that at the track. And if you screw up the track, everybody sees it.
Mm-hmm. Well, so a follow-up to that, as a race strategist, Bernie, if you're sitting there looking at, and a lot of our companies that we work with have this issue, where you have a set of priorities, and they're equally as good at what you choose, maybe it's aerodynamics, maybe it's tire pressure or whatever, how do you make the decision on equally or semi-equally weighted priorities?
Good question.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, well, there's lots of things that we look at. We learn a lot from experience. So the big thing that I've taken away from F1 is how much we analyse stuff that's happened in the past. So we look at a race, even a race that maybe has gone well, or at least externally has gone well. We look at every decision that's been made. Would we make the same decision again if everything was the same? With the information that we had then, would we make the same decision? And if the answer is no, then why not? And if the answer is no, then how can you fix that for next week? So we look a lot at that, and that builds a body of information that we use the next time we're in that decision place. So we start to weight, well, we've known from experience what's going to get the best result. To pick up on what Otmar said is trying to prioritize. F1 is very focused on the goal. Everyone knows what the goal is. That's very clear. And maybe that's not always clear in industry outside of F1. But for us, it's very clear. And one of the notions that we talk about, which we used to think of when we were on the pit wall in that situation, is what's the crocodile closest to the boat? So what's our biggest problem right now that we need to solve right now to get us to the next decision point in this race? And what's going to affect how we get there and get there in the best possible shape? So we start to think about these things like, you think of yourself as like a little army fighting against all these other guys, and you're trying to get your best people in the right positions, trying to get the best out of each of your people, because like Otmar says, there's a very small number of us on race day, so we need to all work really well together, or it just doesn't work.
Well, in using your analogy, or, well, it's not an analogy, but using your data, you're saying there's 100 people or 150 people that are there, and then there was another 900 that contributed to making that happen. How do you keep them all aligned to that goal? Because the goal thing is huge for the companies that we work with.
Yeah, a couple things I want to say. One, and this is so simple, but it's hard sometimes to implement it. To make a good decision, you have to have good information. So just remember that. You can be the best decision maker in the world. With poor information, you will not make a good decision. And there are some times on the pit wall where you wish you had more information. Track's drying. It's about to start raining. The weather radar says this, but you look around, it hasn't started raining yet. What do? And sometimes, and this is where humans come in, you're better off waiting a little bit more to get better information and you've cracked the decision. And other times, if you wait, it's too late. The car's going past the pit entry and now you're out there for another lap. Where did this happen to us? When Checo won, you told me yesterday.
Bahrain. Well, there's been a few incidents that instantly spring to mind, but.
And you as humans have to make that determination. When should I wait a little bit longer because the information I'm going to get now is going to transform my decision, or I waited too long? So that's one thing I wanted to say about that. Now, what was the other question you had?
Goaling for teams, for the other 900 people that aren't there.
And everyone probably knows this. Formula One teams, every second week it used to be, now it's going to be 3 weeks in a row. The world can tell how well you've done. You can tell. And we are generally motivated to do the best we can for the team and on-track performance. Almost everybody. Not all the time. When I was at Ford Motor Company, huge company, not so. Sometimes the incentives of the people weren't to produce the best car. The incentive was to produce a good career. And that's where managers have to incentivize the employees to produce a good car and make sure producing a good car correlates to producing a good career. When you have that divergence, which often you do, you care more about your career than you do about producing a good car. And that's rare in Formula One teams, but it sometimes happens. And that happens when you don't have psychological safety at work, and the owner or the boss puts a lot of pressure on you to perform. Every 2 weeks, you know how well you've done. And suddenly, you start making decisions based on covering yourself, not what's good for the performance of the car. And you have to be careful with that because we're all humans and we all do it. And I think it was Toto Wolff, who I'm sure he got it from somebody else, said, pressure can produce diamonds. So you need pressure. but excessive pressure will burst pipes. So as a manager, you've got to understand and make sure the incentives are aligned with what the business is trying to do. Easy to say, easy concept, hard to do.
Yeah, totally agree. And we were talking a little earlier around psychological safety. One of the things, like our mission at Atlassian, is to unleash the potential of every team. So we want teams operating at the best versions of themselves. And so with that in mind, what do you view as the most important characteristics of high-performing teams?
So for me, there's a psychological safety for sure. And there's a lot that goes into psychological safety, but for sure. And I'm sure Atlassian, you did some things right. You had to. That's why we're all here. It's a successful company. And you probably at the margin want to do a little bit better. But I'm sure you do a lot of things right. I don't know that much about the company. I looked into how it started, so I know a little bit. But you must be doing things right. But for me, psychological safety is the ability to take calculated risks and fail and not be punished for that failure. You should actually be applauded for the failure or taking the risk. Now, if you take the risk and you fail over and over and over, that's an issue, right? But to be able to fail and not be looked down for your failure, that means next time I'll try something again and eventually I'll get it. And Mr. Honda used to say that too. 90% of the stuff I did, I failed, but I learned from my failures. So I think psychological safety is trust, and that's amongst the team and amongst the managers, right? So a big thing for me as a manager was I probably made more mistakes than most of the engineers. Bernie can attest to that.
I'm not going to say anything. It's being recorded.
If I wasn't right, she would have said, oh no. But when you do fail as a manager or a leader, you have to raise your hand and say, I'm really sorry, team. I made this mistake, and I'll learn from it. I'm sorry. And that message that gives is, the boss made a mistake. I too can make a mistake. And then when you allow those mistakes, you learn from them. Now, when you have successes, I just learned recently, you learn more from successes than you do failures. But you have to go through failures to get to that success.
I think just to pick up on a few of the points. So from my side, there's been a few really interesting examples, but one of the things is in a team, in your individual groups within your team, for many years we were a midfield team. We're expected to be 8th, 9th, 10th in the finishing positions. Does that mean that the strategy is always wrong because we've not won the race? Like, how do I view success in a team that's expected to finish 9th and 10th? And we look very carefully at where we think we should have finished, or with perfect decisions where we would have finished, and then we calculate all those points over the season. So we know how many points are lost for reliability, strategy, driver errors, whatever the case may be. And that within our team, even though we are this midfield team, breeds a feeling of success from the strategy department. Even though we're just, teetering a point here and there through the year, the team feels that they've been successful because with the car that we've been given, we're making some good decisions. And that allows us to improve such that when the car we're given is good enough, we're there, we're ready to take it forward. In my final 6 months, I think what Otmar said about the trust issue, having a manager that can stand up and say, we've made a mistake, we're going to look at it next time. When we finish a race, any session, we debrief. I was one of the first people to speak in the debrief. Now, it's obvious to everyone if the strategy's gone wrong. It's really obvious. So in that debrief, I can't just say, we were a bit unlucky with the safety car because it's not good enough. The first thing I will say is, actually, we could have made a better decision there. Stopping one lap earlier would have definitely been better. We'll go back this week. We'll review it with the data we had at the time and see if there's any way we could have made a different decision. And we'll look at the other 9 teams. If they made a different decision, why? Why did they make a different decision to us? Is it that our software's not good enough? Is it that our data's not good enough? Is it that we made the decision too quickly? Generally your teams are made up of bright people, and we would begin the process by looking at what could we have done differently with the data we had at the time, and then start from that section of fault finding, and that bred trust within the team to be able to speak up and go, I think we made a mistake, but we'll fix it for next week.
Oh my gosh, I have a follow-up for that. Go ahead first.
I was going to say your question to me was high-performing teams. Psychological safety was the first thing I talked about. Trust is number 2, and Bernie just touched on it. Go ahead.
Well, so we know, or many people are just starting to understand how much technology is in F1 and how important it is. Atlassian's a technology company that helps teams understand what they're doing, get alignment, and creates visibility to what teams are actually doing. And our partnership is about getting that into organizations. That's the context for my follow-up, which is how in F1 and motorsports has technology started to enable that process that you're talking about, that you go through to get visibility into what's going on race day, after race day, prepping for race day?
Yeah, I think the data has exploded in the very short time that I've been in F1. You know, when I started doing strategy, we were looking at lap times and sector times. So we'd have 3 different sections of a lap, and we would work out if we were fast or slow in that section. So you could say, you know, the car's slow in sector 1, let's figure that out. Now we use GPS, we can split that into 10, 12, 15 sections. We're getting all of that information live. So live, we're fit to improve the car in a way that we were never in the past. The data usage that we have has exploded. Our ability to rewind to a point in time with our software and see what was happening at that exact point, at that exact time. We have information from other cars and what they're discussing with their drivers. So
Tire energies overlap. So live in a race, our tire engineer would say, too much energy in this corner, lift and coast, otherwise we're going to be stopping 3 laps before we want to. Yeah. Live in the race, he'd be watching.
And how new is that?
When I started, we didn't have it.
Yeah,
But I started 35 years ago.
Well, I started doing strategy in 2015, and in 2015 we weren't using GPS, you know, to split the lap times down, and we're making decisions from a much better knowledge base than we ever have been. And you can see the teams that are succeeding in that. You can see the teams that are really embracing that and making the most of it and bringing their people along with them, right?
Remember, good information to make a good decision. I don't think we ever did this, Bernie, but Mercedes used to take a picture at the same point of every tire of every car that passed that point, and they would, in the race, analyze and try to predict when they're going to stop based on tire wear that they could see. And again, good information, better decision. So there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, Andy Green, who was our chief technical officer or technical director, he was one of the first, you probably don't know this, to add telemetry to a Formula One car. And that was only a few sensors. And now we have so much data that...
So to give you an example, and then we'll stop talking, you can ask your next question. But from a pit stop point of view, everyone knows what a pit stop is. Pit stop's one of the most manual processes that we can see. So pit stops, I was having a look, McLaren's fastest pit stop in 2017 was 2.5 seconds. In the whole season, that was their fastest pit stop. Last year, they did a world record pit stop at 1.8 seconds. So that's a 30% improvement in, like, whatever that is, 6 years. How did they get there? Well, all of the teams started to add sensors to the pit stop equipment to figure out where we were losing the time. And as we added more sensors, we figured out where the time loss came, but we figured out better ways to control the guns, better ways to help the guys with feedback, better ways to control the jacks, better information for the drivers. So just by digitalizing this really manual process, we are now at pit stops. We're probably close to the, you know, if you think of what happens at a pit stop, 1.8 is impressive. But that is the most visual process that I think of, the data that has allowed that progression. Every team's doing it because every team is watching what their competitors doing and learning from it as well.
Thank you all for joining us for Driving Systems of High Performance, a podcast from Atlassian and Accenture. Thank you so much to our special guests, Bernie Collins and Otmar Szafnauer, for sharing their insights today. You can check out more about the work Atlassian and Accenture are doing using the links in our show notes. We'll be back with more conversations soon. Follow us now in your podcast app and you won't miss an episode.